What if you found a book that truly made you feel seen, but you had to keep it hidden from the world under your bed? Hi there, I'm Chris with a K, and welcome back to This Week in Queer History, where we celebrate queer moments and icons that I wish I had known about as a young gay kid growing up in conservative America. This week, we're exploring how queer pulp fiction in the 1950s and 1960s became a lifeline for isolated readers, and how authors like Tereska Torres, Marijane Meaker, and Anne Bannon created whole worlds between paperback covers. Worlds that helped queer people find identity, community, and courage at a time when being yourself could cost you everything.
This week in queer history, stories told with love and glee.
The 1950s in America was a decade of conformity. White picket fences, manicured lawns, and an unspoken agreement to pretend that anything outside the norm simply didn't exist. And for queer people, it wasn't just silence, it was criminality. Homosexuality was illegal in every state but one. Bars were raided, people were fired from their jobs, and the psychiatric establishment, they labeled as sick and in need of treatment. It was also the time of the Lavender Scare, when thousands of suspected queer government employees were fired under the guise of national security. In films, on television, and in newspapers, we were invisible, unless we were the joke or a cautionary tale. For LGBTQ people in small towns, especially young ones, the future felt like a blank page. And then, in the unlikeliest of places, on the spinning racks of drugstores and bus stations and corner newsstands, something remarkable appeared. Pulp fiction. These were cheap paperbacks with lurid covers, promising scandal, but hiding something far more precious inside: recognition. Before the term lesbian pulp even existed, French writer Tereska Torres planted the seed. In 1950, she published Women's Barracks, inspired by her time serving in the Free French Forces during World War II. Torres didn't set out to write a lesbian novel, but her honest depictions of emotional and romantic bonds between women were enough for American publishers to slap on a sensational cover and market it as Forbidden Love Behind Military Walls. The book became the first paperback original to openly address lesbian relationships, and the first lesbian pulp bestseller, selling over 4 million copies. Publishers wary of censorship insisted on moralizing. Characters who strayed from heterosexuality often faced punishment, regret, or tragedy. But between those lines, queer women saw something revolutionary themselves. The book's notoriety grew when it was named in the 1952 U.S. House Select Committee on Current Pornographic Materials hearings. Politicians denounced it. Moral guardians wrung their hands. And readers? They bought more copies. Somewhere in rural America, a young woman hid it under her pillow and read it by flashlight, savoring every page that told her she was not alone. Oh, that combination of fear and thrill, knowing the world considered your identity dangerous while you clutched proof that you weren't alone. It's one of the most delicious queer acts of survival that I love. If Torres cracked open the door, Marijane Meaker strode right through, arms full of stories. Writing under several pen names, she helped define the lesbian pulp boom. As Vin Packer, she wrote Spring Fire in 1952, which is often credited as the first lesbian paperback of the pulp era. It sold 500,000 copies in its first printing, and this was proof of the public's appetite for these stories. Spring Fire's story ended tragically, which was demanded by the censors. But for the readers, the magic wasn't the end of the story. It was in the middle. The moments of desire, recognition, and the connection that at that time had never been reflected in mainstream culture. Meaker was a literary chameleon, producing crime thrillers, young adult novels, and nonfiction about queer life, under other names. She had a romantic relationship with Patricia Highsmith, author of The Price of Salt, which is another landmark in queer literature. Looking back, Meaker acknowledged the double-edged nature of pulp. Straight readers thought they were peeking into scandal, and queer readers were mapping their own existence. But then, by the late 1950s, Anne Bannon emerged as the undisputed queen of lesbian pulp. Starting with Odd Girl Out, she released in 1957, her Beebo Brinker Chronicles gave readers something more than titillation. They offered heart, character, and community. Her swaggering, leather-jacketed butch Beebo Brinker became an icon, and the Greenwich Village setting served as a promised land for readers stuck in small towns, offering a glimpse of a world where queer people could find each other. Bannon mastered the art of dual messaging, giving censors their morally acceptable endings while filling her pages with moments of queer joy, camaraderie, and desire. Readers didn't just consume her books, they cherished them. They passed them hand to hand, rereading them until the covers fell apart, and dreamed of stepping into the world she had drawn. Bannon's honesty made her work timeless. Her books are still in print today. Queer pulp was more than entertainment. It was connection. Each book was a portable safe space, a paper-bound speakeasy that could be hidden in a handbag or a coat pocket. The distribution networks were ingenious. Readers mailed books to each other across state lines, smuggled them into college dorms, and even sent them to strangers they met through cryptic classifieds in the back of other pulps. These paperbacks built invisible webs of community at a time when being seen together in public could be dangerous. For many, they were the first time they saw a queer relationship depicted at all. Even when the endings bowed to the censors, the middle pages brimmed with something priceless, the possibility of love. But there was a price to pay with more visibility. Torres faced public scrutiny, Meaker cloaked herself in pseudonyms to protect her career, and Bannon balanced her writing life with the demands of a heterosexual marriage in a homophobic culture. And yet they all wrote. They made queer people visible when invisibility was the law of the land. They built bridges between isolated readers and between queer culture and the mainstream, bridges that later movements would march across. By the late 1960s, as the gay rights movement gained momentum, pulp began to fade. New feminist and LGBTQ presses could finally publish stories without mandatory tragedy, but those presses stood on pulp's shoulders. Without Torres, Meaker, Bannon, and others, the audience might not have been ready for openly happy endings. Books can do something pretty magical. They can take you completely out of where you are, away from your school, your family, your whole little world, and drop you somewhere totally new. But at the same time, they can hold up a mirror and quietly show you who you might become. For me, that happened in the 6th grade when I read Tiger Eyes by Judy Blume. I was Davy, that 15-year-old protagonist. I felt her grief, I fell in love with the character Wolf, and I cried as she navigated a world that felt so different from where she came from. Puberty was starting for me, and I was bawling for my best friend, Kyriakos, and I didn't have the language for it. But that book gave me a safe place to feel what I couldn't say. That's what Torres, Meaker, and Bannon gave their readers decades earlier. Torres's women's Barracks might not have meant to be a manifesto, but for some women, it was the first glimmer of recognition. And Meaker's Spring Fire whispered secret desires and made them real. Bannon built a whole neighborhood where they could imagine living as themselves. And even though Tiger Eyes wasn't a queer book, for me, it was a quiet hand reaching through the dark, saying, "You're not alone." And for queer women in the 1950s and 1960s, that hand might have come from the paperback in a bus station. The covers were different, but the magic was the same. A good story can be more than an escape. It can be a lifeline. And whether it's a wartime memoir turned pulp sensation, a noir paperback sold in secret, or a beloved Beebo Brinker novel, the message endures. You are not invisible, and you are not alone. If you enjoyed this deep dive into queer pulp history, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Which of these authors' works have you read before, or which do you want to track down now? And check out the video popping up right over here for more queer history. And if you want to see what queer event or icon was born on your birthday, check out myqueerbirthday.com. The link is down in the description below. Until next time, stay strong, stay bold, and keep making history.